Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jonathan Carr-West. I'm Chief Executive of LGIU, the Local Government Information Unit. Thank you for joining us here as we come towards the end of election afternoon, counting results. They're coming in thick and fast now. I'm very pleased to be joined again by Dr. Greg Stride, who's our resident election expert. Greg, when we spoke this morning, we were looking at the sort of results as of about 8 a.m. It's now 4 o'clock in the afternoon. When we spoke this morning, we saw a pattern which was mainly of sort of Conservative councils being lost to no overall control, a sort of steady drumbeat of losses to the Conservatives. But we were saying that it wasn't so clear who was winning, that it was a sort of relatively undramatic picture, but sort of progressive. Does it still look like that, or have things got more dramatic as the day has gone on?
I think it would be fair to say things have definitely got more dramatic as the day goes on.
It was a leading question. Things have
Exactly.
got a lot more dramatic as the day has gone on.
We're still seeing the main story, or the main overall story being Conservative losses. But in terms of who is gaining, that's now becoming a more dramatic picture. And in some places like the Southwest, it's become the gains are coming in places that we wouldn't have expected. So if we want to proceed in the same way as we did this morning by going through the regions.
Yeah, let's look at each region.
Excellent. So
what's been happening?
Okay, can you see this all right?
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, this is the story by just before 4 o'clock. I ran the maps off just about 5 minutes ago. So we're right up to the minute now. So we're going to start just by looking at where results
we've had about just over half of councils have declared at this point.
That's about right, yeah. So you can see here there's still very large patches of purple, especially in places like the Southeast, which we know has the most councils to announce. But there are some places that are beginning to fill in. So we've seen about half of the results now, enough to get a good idea about what's going on. I would say with the fairly major exception of the Southeast, where we still haven't seen most councils come in there. And I think that's going to be the continuing story of the afternoon. So if we look to the East Midlands now, so as we were saying this morning, one of the big stories about the East Midlands was places like we can see here on the east of the East Midlands, where they were going from Conservative to no overall control. And as the day has gone on, that story has started to shift a little bit. So you've seen places like Northeast Derbyshire, which has gone from Conservative straight to Labour, which is quite a dramatic shift. And you've also seen Erewash do the same thing, where it's moved not from Conservative to no overall control, which is what we were primarily seeing to begin the day, but straight from Conservative to Labour.
Yeah,
which is something that obviously interests people a great deal. So that's kind of how things have progressed in the East Midlands. I will say that still most results that have come in, or the most prominent changing of hands, has been Conservative to no overall control, but with these exceptions. In the east of England, there's still lots and lots of places that haven't yet declared. But you've seen a few like Dacorum, which has gone from Conservative to the Liberal Democrats, where patterns are starting to form. Yeah, this is another interesting area, the east of England, because you've seen places like Welwyn Hatfield as well continue this pattern of moving from Conservative to no overall control. To move on to the Northeast, there's still not been that many. I mean, there's not that many contests in the Northeast is one of the reasons we haven't seen that many results. But one of the important ones is Middlesbrough, which I think has just in the last few minutes announced its council results as well as its mayoral results, and the Labour Party has won them both. So Middlesbrough is looking like a victory for the Labour Party at the moment.
And that's a fairly emblematic seat, isn't it, or council, because that was Labour for very, very many years and was part of the sort of so-called red wall that fell to the Conservatives recently.
Exactly, yeah. But as we were saying this morning, it's one of those ones where Middlesbrough seems to have gone really well for the Labour Party, but Hartlepool, which they might have expected to go the same way, didn't. It continued to be no overall control. So it's still I mean, I don't want to hang on to the narrative from earlier in the day, but it's still not entirely clear that who is winning in these elections.
Yeah.
So one that I've been watching in the Northwest, so we still had lots of councils that haven't yet announced in the Northwest, and there's very few changes that we've seen. Partly, I would say, because there's not that many Conservative councils in the Northwest, but one of the ones that now has continued on the trend of moving from Conservative to no overall control is Pendle. Pendle was one that we pointed out in our Ones to Watch guide, is if the Conservatives lost Pendle, they could consider that a pretty poor night in the Northwest, and that is indeed what's happened. Pendle is also sort of emblematic in another sense, because I think it was the final region, the Northwest was the final region where the Conservatives hadn't yet lost a council, and now they have, and it announced just a few minutes ago. The Southeast is again, so I mentioned this earlier, the Southeast is a really interesting place at the moment. In fact, this tiny area in the Southeast around, I think it's around Windsor and Maidenhead, where you have Slough on one side and Bracknell Forest on the other side, both of which are really, really interesting contests. So in Slough, I don't know if you can see, it's the first Labour loss. Labour has lost the majority of the council to no overall control, for reasons that I think you probably have more insight in than I do.
Well, it's worth setting the context that Slough issued what we call a Section 114 notice last year. That means effectively they went bankrupt. Commercial investments that didn't work out, overspending. They've had commissioners in running the council rather than elected councillors. So it has been a bit of a disaster zone. So I think it's not surprising in those circumstances to see Labour, in this case, losing control. Although it's worth noting that in Thurrock, which has a very similar history, the Conservatives managed to hang on earlier in the day. So these things don't always sort of inexorably lead to a loss of control, but I think it would have been surprising had Slough not been lost.
Yeah, especially because the places surrounding Slough have seemed to have wholeheartedly rejected the Conservatives, as far as we can tell. And particularly one of the ones that's most dramatic, I think, in this election so far is Bracknell Forest, which has gone. I think the Labour Party went from having 4 councillors to having a majority in one electoral cycle,
Yeah,
which is,
and they won 18 seats. It's
extraordinary. Yeah.
And at the same time, Windsor and Maidenhead is a Liberal Democrat gain, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, Windsor and Maidenhead announced a few hours ago, and it went from Conservative, a fairly solid Conservative seat, to Liberal Democrats. And it's one of those ones that's, again, it's emblematic of what is considered to be the Conservative heartland that is now shifting away.
I mean, you don't think of Bracknell Forest, Slough, Windsor and Maidenhead. That area is not where you immediately go to when you're thinking about sort of dramatic, radical election results, is it?
No, exactly. And I mean, it's really interesting. And these places, I think, yeah, I don't know how the analysis of these places will develop over the next few hours. I wonder if it'll be to do with being surrounding London or something along those lines. But it'll definitely be interesting to see what people have to say about these, because they're not only shifting, they're shifting in different directions, which is, yeah, quite strange. So the Southwest, and it's not just because I live there, but I think that the Southwest has been one of the most interesting regions this election, because you've had West Devon, for example, has moved from being Conservative to no overall control, which it had before. But South Hams has also moved from Conservative straight to Liberal Democrat. And we've seen over here, Swindon, the seat that everybody was watching, where the Labour Party launched their campaign, has moved from Conservative to Labour. So yeah, lots and lots of places in the Southwest are shifting control, as well as the now familiar site of, I think this is South Gloss, which moved from Conservative to no overall control. So lots of changing of hands in the Southwest. A very interesting region for these elections. Oh, and Plymouth, of course. Yeah, sorry, I don't want to harp on about this. Plymouth, of course, changed as well from no overall control to Labour. The West Midlands is another interesting district, another interesting region. You've got East Staffordshire here, which has moved from Conservative to Labour, which is, again, another emblematic victory. This is one of the places where Labour traditionally did very well. During this sort of Brexit realignment, things changed a bit, and now it appears that Labour has been able to regain the losses that it made there over the last few years. Also, places like Bromsgrove and Cannock Chase have done the pattern of moving from Conservative to no overall control.
Yeah.
Also, this one in the bottom right, Stratford-on-Avon, moved from Conservative to Liberal Democrat, and that was one of our ones to watch, where we said, if this happens, it's been a good night for the Liberal Democrats, and that's what it looks like has happened.
I mean, the Liberal Democrats will be feeling, I think, unequivocally pleased with themselves, won't they? They've held on to all of their councils, and they've made several key gains.
Definitely, yes, definitely. Final region that we'll be looking at today is Yorkshire and the Humber. So interesting one, because when we spoke about this earlier, we talked about how the most interesting thing that had happened here is that Hull hadn't changed. It started Liberal Democrat and was now Liberal Democrat. Well, now 7 or 8 hours later or whatever it is, the most interesting thing that's happened here again is no change, which is that Sheffield has not changed from no overall control, and both the Liberal Democrats and Labour had their eyes on it. So Sheffield has continued to go in the same direction of this no overall control majority. So very interesting overall, I would say.
Yeah, so we've got as you say, a sort of steady drumbeat of the Conservatives losing control to no overall control, punctuated by some really quite dramatic swings from both Conservatives, both to Labour and to Liberal Democrat control. Of course, we should remind people that this is a local election. It's about choosing the people who will make difficult choices about local public services, and we should be cautious about, the press will generally be wanting to see this in terms of what does it tell us about who's more likely to win a general election. But I think you and I would both be skeptical about how far one can project these results out onto a general election.
I definitely think so. And I think there's a couple of local authorities that really prove that. And the first one that I'd be paying attention to is Mid-Suffolk, where the Greens have just taken control, which is one of those things where it's difficult to imagine, although I don't want to make any predictions because I know how that goes, but it's difficult to imagine that translating into a parliamentary seat in that sort of region. Maybe it will, but it's difficult to imagine it. But they have now convincingly taken control of the council there. And the other place where this is true as well is Slough, as you mentioned earlier, where the internal dynamics of electoral politics in Slough Council are very different from what the parliamentary dynamics might be.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. At the same time, it is worth reflecting that when these seats were last up in 2019, the Conservatives did very badly. They lost 1,300 seats. They lost 44 councils. So that there was a sense they had already lost most of the most losable seats and were defending a sort of a core. So to have dropped significantly, and I think we're now looking at nearly 500 seats lost with just over half of councils declared. So the sort of predictions that seemed kind of right at the upper end of probability around potentially losing another 1,000 seats don't seem far off. It might not quite hit that, but it will be there or thereabouts. So there won't be many happy faces, I would imagine, in Conservative HQ, but equally, as you say, it's not necessarily there won't necessarily be massive celebrations for Labour. For the Lib Dems, there might be. I think they may be feeling happy. Greg, very quickly before we go, you've done a lot of work in the run-up to elections around voter ID. When we spoke earlier, you were very cautious about saying that it's really too early to say anything sensible about turnout or about the effect that voter ID may or may not have had on that. Have we seen anything coming out during the day that would change your view on that, or do we still need to wait and see and sort of look at this properly?
So we haven't seen anything that would change my view. I'm quite happy to say that things have come out that have confirmed my view that we should wait and see how things have gone, including a statement by the Electoral Commission where they essentially said, we'll be doing studies on this to figure out what's happened. They sort of, I think, they said that it appeared that people had been turned away from voting, which is sort of inevitable when you introduce a reform like this. So, but what they wanted to do is wait and see after significant scientific study was done, who was turned away and that sort of thing.
And important that we learn lessons this time around, because we may have another set of local elections before a general election. We probably will, but we may not. This is one of our few opportunities to get this right before we have a general election in which everyone in the country will be voting. So these problems could be scaled up significantly.
Exactly, and in places like Scotland and Wales, they won't have an opportunity to practice on this before a general election.
Sure, that's a very good point. Okay, anything to watch out for between now and we think the last declarations will come in around 8? We always think that, and then we always find ourselves waiting until 9, 10, 11 o'clock for them to come in. But anything in particular we should be looking out for over the last few hours? The southeast, it looks like.
That's what I would say. I would say look out for seats in the southeast. Anywhere in the southeast, the east of England or the East Midlands that hasn't yet declared, it will be interesting to see, especially the Conservative ones, which direction they're going to go in. That's definitely where I would be paying attention.
Greg, thank you very much. We will reconvene when all the results are in. Until then, thank you for joining us, everyone.